What if community as you know it is not actually what God designed community to be? I enjoy people watching, and there are a lot of great places to do that here on campus, but especially on the drill field as classes are changing. And something that I've come to observe are that most people walk around with their faces down in their phones, maybe headphones are in their ears, and they're just oblivious to the people around them. And that wouldn't be such a big deal except for the fact that so many people are lonely. A Barna study found that the age group between 16 and 24 experience loneliness more often and more intensely than any other age group. In fact, the study found that 2/3 of this group would use the word loneliness as a descriptive word for last year. The data also shows that this age group is twice as likely to say that they're lonely compared to a decade ago's same age group. And I think it probably has to do with the fact that today we are connected digitally more than ever, yet disconnected physically more than ever. We live in a digital world, and too often we substitute online connections for real relationships, and we're suffering the consequences with heightened isolation and loneliness, addiction to screens, loss of freedom, consumerism and misplaced identities, and extreme individualism, and so on. We are in need of rediscovering what a healthy community looks like and how we can pursue it together. God has designed us for community. There's a need that's woven deep within each of us that's been placed there by God that's meant to be fulfilled with one another. No personality type, no Enneagram number is ever meant to live in isolation for long. This God-designed community is intended to bring us together face to face for real connection with one another. This connection opens us up to things like transparency and vulnerability, accountability, discipleship, commitment, and meaningful time together, which are all key ingredients of a healthy community life. Luke writes about the beautiful community life of the early Christians in Acts chapter 2, and we have a lot that we can learn from them. Starting at verse 42, it says this: "All the believers devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, and to sharing in meals, including the Lord's Supper, and to prayer. And all the believers met together in one place and shared everything they had. They sold their property and possessions and shared the money with those in need. They worshiped together at the temple each day, met in homes for the Lord's Supper, and shared their meals with great joy and generosity, all the while praising God and enjoying the good will of all people. And each day, the Lord added to their fellowship those who were being saved." Here, Luke shows us what a healthy community of people following Jesus looks like. Now, I'm sure this community had its difficulties because people are broken and they didn't have COVID to deal with, but what an example for us to aspire to become. Today, we've warped God's original image of community. We've traded commitment-based communities that were built on vulnerability and longevity for temporary human interactions that are based on personal preference. We've idolized individualism to the extreme. We've even been trained to value our freedoms, our wants, our taste, our preferences above anything else. Hashtag you do you. And we've even fallen into the trap of customizing our friends. We pick and choose who we want to be friends with. We've traded diversity for individualism and commonality. We don't have to love anybody that's different if we don't want to. And although preference and personalization are not inherently bad, they can lead to increased isolation, increased loneliness if we take our consumerism into our relationships. We are in need of God redesigning our community life. Tonight, I want us to look at 3 characteristics of a healthy community found here in Acts, and then one takeaway. First, the early Christians were for one another. Tangibly, sacrificially, meeting on a daily basis, talking about God and doing life together, sharing what they had with one another, selling their possessions together and giving to those that were in need. They carried one another's burdens. And the text says that they enjoyed the goodwill of all people. In a God-designed community, people are genuinely for one another. That means there's no need for jealousy or manipulation or gossip. There's no need to compare or compete with one another. No one is threatened by each other because they're genuinely for one another. To be for one another, we must adopt Jesus' words as a way of life to love our neighbor. And not forget the part where he says, like you love yourself, not in a put yourself first, be consumed by you kind of way, but the way where you love because he first loved you. We must practice sacrifice, choosing to show up even when it's inconvenient, practicing being transparent and vulnerable and making room for accountability and growth. We must learn to truly celebrate one another, to be big fans of each other, offering grace and mercy and forgiveness on the regular basis, and rejoicing when people are rejoicing, and having sorrow when people are sorrowful. This is what it looks like to be for one another. The second thing I see within this community is people interacting with one another in meaningful, life-giving ways, like sharing meals together, being in one another's homes, praying together, serving together, supporting one another, praising God together, supporting those in need together. Their lives were interwoven in deep, meaningful ways. And in God-designed communities, relationships are built on meaningful time together. And in order to have meaningful time together, it means we've got to put our cell phones away. We've got to remove ourselves from the screens, maybe less binge watching, less video game playing, and more investing in one another's life and spurring one another on towards Jesus and doing kingdom things here and now. What are some meaningful ways that this community spent time doing that you can incorporate into your own communities? The third thing that I see within this community is their devotion. Luke says that all the believers devoted themselves to these things. And when you devote yourself to something, you show up for it, you commit to it, you're loyal to it. This community chose one another and chose to commit to the practices that made it to be a life-giving community that spurs one another on towards Jesus. In a God-designed community, people choose to show up. They choose to be present, and they choose to be intentional with one another. They choose to invest in their own faith as well as the faith of their community. Devotion outweighs emotion, so when you're not feeling it, devotion leads to commitment. Devotion leads us to be able to extend grace to one another, because our loyalty to our community goes beyond preference, but is rooted in commitment. In God-designed communities, people are radically for one another. They spend meaningful time together, and they are devoted to building healthy community that spurs one another on towards Jesus. And look what the result is. Luke says that each day the Lord added to their fellowship those who were being saved. Each day, God added to their fellowship those who were being saved. God added to their community daily. This means that God-designed community is appealing to others, that people will want in, and the community is open to all. Jesus didn't live to protect and enlarge his own space, but to make space for others. And as followers of Jesus, we must open our hearts and our lives to create environments of welcome. When people see this kind of community, they'll want in. And not only that, but this passage says that they were saved, meaning that they believed and they trusted in God because of what they experienced and heard and saw within this community. This is the kind of community we here at Wesley aspire to be. And this only happens when we learn to live with open doors, and Jesus models this so well. Unlike our culture's hospitality, Jesus' hospitality was scandalously unconditional. Jesus was able to model what our culture so desperately needs: spaces of welcome where strangers, enemies, and outsiders and others can become our friends. Jesus created pockets of love in a culture of fear and formed a new kind of community, the church. On this side of heaven, we'll never truly experience relational wholeness because of our inherent brokenness within our lives, but God can help shape our own hearts and the heart of our community. So what's the health of your own heart and the heart of your community? What areas do you need God to redesign so that you would be genuinely for one another, spending meaningful time together, and be devoted to the things that spur one another on towards Jesus? How does our community become more open to making spaces for others? Also, there's more to say on this, but not all friendships should be for the long haul. There are toxic friendships that we need to walk away from, not out of inconvenience, but out of protection and safety of our own heart and lives. So if you're in a complicated friendship or relationship with someone, would you seek help and to know what to do within it? And if Hugh or I could support you in any way, we would be glad to connect with you. And if you're somebody that's just lacking community life, then we've got something for you and for anybody else. This week, we're launching Chords. Chords are our community of rich discipleship. They're groups of about 5 to 7 students that gather face to face on a weekly basis, doing meaningful things, spurring one another on towards Jesus. And if you're interested in joining a Chord group, then we've got a group for you. If you go to our website or to our Instagram, you'll find more information about Chords. We would love to plug you in. Friends, may we all come to see how Jesus' radical hospitality impacts our own lives. And because of what we've experienced from it, may we open ourselves up to embracing others the way that we have been embraced by Jesus.